The golden glow of sunset spilled gently over the rooftops of San Francisco, casting a warm hue across the skyline and shimmering off the glass windows of high-rise buildings. Inside a sleek penthouse, Ethan Miles, the CEO of a leading tech company, was finishing the last lines of a contract on his laptop screen. He was a man of discipline, control, and absolutely no tolerance for surprises. Ethan's life was meticulously planned, from his daily routines, business strategies, to the way he raised his 5-year-old daughter, Mia. When it came time to hire a new tutor for her, he set one clear requirement: serious, professional, and strictly by the book. Everything else he left to his assistant. So when the doorbell chimed, Ethan rose and unlocked the door remotely, fully confident in the thoroughly vetted selection. But the woman standing on the other side wasn't what he expected. Sophie Lane arrived with soft curls framing her face, a simple floral dress, and a bright, cheerful smile. She didn't look like a strict tutor. In fact, she seemed a bit too casual. "Hi, I'm Sophie Lane. It's a pleasure to meet you," she said warmly. Ethan crossed his arms, his voice cool and composed. "Who are you? You're clearly not the person I hired." The story began with a mistake, but perhaps it was fate in disguise. From the very first day, Sophie Lane managed to unsettle Ethan. She didn't follow the carefully outlined curriculum he had prepared. Instead, she transformed the study room into a creative space where Mia could learn through play. Lessons became fairy tales, basic math was taught with drawings, and every session ended in laughter. Ethan didn't like it. He hadn't hired someone to play with his daughter. He needed discipline, results, control. "You need to stick to the curriculum I provided," he said firmly the next morning, watching Sophie let Mia draw freely instead of drilling the alphabet. But Sophie only shrugged, unfazed. "I am teaching Mia," she said calmly, "just in a way that keeps her excited." Ethan tightened his grip on his briefcase, forcing himself to stay composed. He wasn't used to defiance, but then what disarmed him completely was the pure joy on Mia's face. She eagerly recounted what she'd learned, showed him pages filled with color, spoke about letters like they were her best friends. Something stirred quietly inside Ethan, a strange, unfamiliar feeling he couldn't quite name. He didn't trust Sophie, but he couldn't deny the results she was getting. "You have 1 week," he said firmly. Sophie grinned, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "1 week is all I need to change your mind." Ethan turned away, doubt still pressing against his chest. He hated feeling out of control, but with Sophie Lane, he had never been in control to begin with. On a crisp Saturday morning, sunlight filtered through the leaves in a quiet San Francisco park. Sophie had brought Mia here for a math lesson. Ethan had reluctantly agreed the night before, worn down by Mia's persistent pleading. Now he stood at a distance, arms crossed, watching with clear skepticism. A lesson in the park? Using pebbles and grass? Pointless. Sophie crouched down on the grass, placing 3 small stones together, then added 2 more. "Mia, can you count how many there are now?" Mia hesitated, then slowly counted, her face lighting up. 5. Ethan let out a soft sigh. He didn't believe this method could be truly effective. But he stayed, watching. Mia kept learning. Sophie gave her space to think, never rushed to correct her. No pressure, no rigidity, and somehow, Mia was learning faster than ever. When Sophie placed 7 stones and removed 3, Mia paused, concentrated, then beamed. 4! There are 4 left. Ethan blinked. Mia had never grasped a concept this quickly using the structured method. He murmured to himself, not realizing he'd spoken aloud. Sophie glanced his way, her eyes calm and quietly knowing. But she said nothing. For the first time, Ethan didn't look at Sophie with suspicion. He saw someone who was genuinely helping his daughter grow, not just with knowledge, but with love and freedom. Something inside him shifted, subtly, gently, but enough to make him linger longer than he meant to. That evening, Ethan returned home after a long day at work. As he stepped into his office, the first thing he saw was a drawing laid neatly on his desk. Crayon lines, bright colors, clumsy strokes, clearly Mia's work. The picture showed three people: a man in a black suit, a woman with curly hair and warm eyes, and a little girl between them, holding both of their hands. Below, in wobbly letters, were the words, "Happy Family." Ethan's heart skipped. He knew exactly who they were. He picked up the paper, fingers trembling slightly. Part of him wanted to laugh. It was just a child's fantasy, but another part felt fear. Sophie wasn't family. She was just a temporary tutor, a stranger. He walked out quickly. In the living room, Mia sat playing with her dolls. The moment she saw him, she lit up. "Daddy, Miss Sophie is coming tomorrow, right?" He paused. For a second, he didn't know what to say. Then his voice turned firm. "Mia, tomorrow will be Miss Sophie's last lesson." She froze. "But why?" "She's so nice. I like her." "I've made my decision," he said, leaving no room for argument. But Mia's eyes welled up, shimmering. "She feels like family." Ethan turned away. He couldn't bear to see her cry. The next morning, when Sophie arrived, Mia didn't run to greet her like she usually did. She hid in her room. Sophie turned to Ethan, searching his face. "Today's your last session," he said flatly. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, she replied, "You know, you're not just hurting her, you're hurting yourself too." And then she left. The door clicked shut behind her, softly, but leaving behind a silence that Ethan couldn't quite define. Just a day after Sophie left, the apartment felt unusually quiet. Mia no longer talked excitedly about her lessons, no longer drew, no longer laughed like before. Ethan told himself she just needed time. But every time he walked into her room and saw her clutching her teddy bear, silently staring out the window, a slow heaviness settled in his chest. Then came the night. At 2 a.m., Ethan woke to the sound of a faint cough and soft whimpering. His heart dropped. He rushed to Mia's room. She was curled up in bed, her face flushed red, pillow damp with sweat. "Mia!" Ethan called, panting. He touched her forehead, burning hot. But what broke him wasn't the fever. It was the delirious whisper from her lips. "Miss Sophie?" He tried to lift her up, to give her water, but his hands trembled and he spilled the glass. He reached for the thermometer, but it slipped and rolled across the floor. Ethan, the man always in control, now stood helpless. And then, without hesitation, he grabbed his phone and dialed Sophie's number. The ring echoed through the silent night. A sleepy but alert voice answered. "Ethan, why are you calling at this hour?" He swallowed hard, voice raspy. "Mia has a fever and she keeps calling for you." A beat of silence. Then Sophie replied, firm and without hesitation, "I'm coming." 15 minutes later, she rushed into the apartment wearing an oversized sweater, hair tousled from sleep. She didn't waste a second. She went straight to Mia's side, gently placing her hands on the girl's forehead, wiping her face with a cool cloth, softly humming a lullaby Ethan had never heard, but Mia clearly had. Within minutes, Mia's breathing slowed. Her tiny body relaxed. A faint smile crossed her lips. "Miss Sophie? You really came." Ethan stood quietly in the corner, watching every movement, the way Sophie touched Mia's hair, held her hand with infinite care, as if she had always belonged here, not out of obligation, but out of love. And for the first time, Ethan no longer saw her as an outsider. The next morning, the apartment was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet, softer, deeper. Ethan sat alone in his office, staring at his laptop screen, unable to focus on a single word. His mind kept replaying one moment. Mia's face when she saw Sophie. The small smile despite the fever, and the whispered words, "Miss Sophie, you really came." He had tried to deny everything, tried to shut down emotion, but the truth was undeniable. Mia didn't just need a good tutor. She needed someone who genuinely loved her. And maybe so did he. All day, Ethan stared at his phone, typed a message, then erased it, dialed, then hung up. The man who once made million-dollar decisions in seconds now hesitated over a single text. Then Mia walked in, holding her teddy bear, her voice soft. "Daddy, do you love Miss Sophie?" The question cut clean through him. Honest, simple, deep. Ethan froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. In that moment, he understood it wasn't just about Mia. It was about him, too. About the wound he'd hidden for years. About the fear of loss that had closed off his heart. He pulled Mia into his arms, holding her close. "I think I need to talk to Miss Sophie," he whispered. And for the first time in years, Ethan let himself open up. He sent Sophie a message. "Can we meet at the park this afternoon?" 1 minute. Then 2. His heart pounded. "I'll be there." Just 4 words. But Ethan knew. It was a door he had kept shut for too long, now slowly opening again. That afternoon, the park glowed with the soft light of early evening. Golden hues danced across the cobblestone paths as sunlight filtered through the trees. Mia skipped among the flower beds, tossing tiny pebbles into the pond, her laughter ringing through the air like music untouched by sorrow. Ethan stood at a distance, hands in his pockets, a weight pressing gently against his chest. He had once believed that keeping his distance was how he protected himself and his daughter. But today, for the first time, he wondered, what was I really protecting? Or was I just pushing love away? On a nearby bench, Sophie sat quietly. She didn't glance around to find him. She didn't wave. She just sat, like a test he had to take on his own. Ethan knew if he wanted her to stay, he had to be the one to walk toward her. He inhaled deeply and took slow steps in her direction. His heart pounded, not from fear of rejection, but from the possibility that it might be too late. He stood beside her, barely an arm's length away, yet it felt like miles. Together, they watched Mia. "Sophie," he began, his voice hoarse, "I used to believe control was the only way to survive. Losing my wife made me shut down. I built walls, thinking it was the only way to protect Mia. And myself." He paused, swallowing hard. "Then you came, and you didn't tear the walls down. You just stood outside them, patient, gentle, never demanding. You gave Mia something I didn't know she needed. You gave me something I didn't realize I had lost." Sophie turned to look at him. Her eyes shimmered with emotion, but she remained silent. Ethan went on, "I'm sorry for pushing you away. I'm sorry for hurting Mia. And I'm sorry for being too afraid to admit that I need you." He took a long breath and finally turned to face her fully. "I can't promise perfection. I can't promise I'll always love the right way, but I promise I'll try. Not just for Mia, but for me." He reached out, palm open, offering something more than just words. "If you're still willing, maybe we can figure out where this goes, together?" Sophie looked at his hand for a moment, then placed hers in his, softly but with certainty. In the distance, Mia spun around, shouting, "Daddy, Miss Sophie, let's go on the Ferris wheel." Sophie laughed, her smile finally blooming in full. Ethan tightened his grip gently and followed the sound of their daughter's joy. For the first time in years, he wasn't afraid. Because this time, he wasn't walking alone. Time passed gently after that fateful meeting in the park, and life between Ethan, Mia, and Sophie began to blend naturally, without force. The boundaries between outsider and family slowly disappeared. Sophie became an inseparable part of every ordinary moment. She helped Mia prepare breakfast, crafted handmade school projects, and sometimes simply sat beside Ethan in silence. No need for words, yet still bringing peace. In the evenings when Mia had gone to bed, Ethan and Sophie would sit on the balcony, sharing things they had never told anyone else. The pain of loss, the loneliness they had carried, and the dreams they thought they'd buried long ago. Ethan was no longer the cold man he used to be. He began to notice all the little things. Sophie preferred peppermint tea at night, loved soft jazz, and had the habit of brushing her hair behind her ear when reading. He started leaving small handwritten notes on the table. "Hope you have a peaceful day," or "Thank you for always being here." Love didn't come loudly. It arrived like morning light, quiet, consistent, and impossible to deny. One evening, as Ethan watched Sophie reading on the couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting gentle light on her peaceful face, He realized he couldn't imagine life without her. She wasn't just someone he loved. She was home. The next morning, Ethan sat beside Mia while she was coloring. He hesitated for a moment, then gently asked, "Mia, if one day Daddy wanted to marry Miss Sophie, what would you think?" She looked up, eyes sparkling with curiosity, then broke into a wide grin. "So Miss Sophie would really be part of our family? Like forever? That would be amazing!" Ethan laughed, heart light as air, and pulled his daughter into his arms. Mia was ready, and so was he. A few days later, the two of them began preparing for a very special evening. Ethan meticulously planned every detail, twinkling lights across the balcony, Sophie's favorite candles, and set a dinner table under the moonlight with a white cloth and light wine. Mia wore her prettiest dress and excitedly helped him fold napkins and place flowers. When Sophie stepped out onto the balcony, she stood still, stunned. The whole setting looked like something out of a fairy tale, tender, warm, and full of love. Ethan walked toward her and gently took her hand. "I used to believe I didn't need anyone else in my life. But then you came, bringing your smile, your gentleness, and a light I didn't know I'd been missing." He knelt down. In his hand was a simple, elegant ring, just like her. "Sophie Lane," he paused, his voice shaking slightly, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The moment stood still. A tear slipped down Sophie's cheek. She nodded softly, whispering, "Yes." Behind them, Mia clapped and shouted, "Yay, a real family now." Ethan pulled them both into his arms. Under the twinkling lights and joyful laughter, they knew this wasn't the end. This was a brand new beginning, warm and whole. Happiness, after all, doesn't come from perfection. It comes from the people we choose to walk beside us.